Hi, everybody. Welcome to the second in a series of conversations that a few of us investors are having about various aspects of how work is changing. I'm going to invite Kara Nortman up to join, also known as the newest owner of LA's newest soccer team. Kara, if you come up and join me in this, there we go. Hi. Oh, I think you might be muted still. Okay, well, I'm going to get you in a second, and I'll just give a little context on this event before David joins us.
I got it.
Great.
This whole new thing is new to me.
I know, all of us. It's like it's all of us figuring our way through in these experiments. So this thing started as Kara and I saying, hey, we are having some interested in having some conversations among us about how we think all this lockdown and everything happening in the country is going to change work. We might as well just open it up. Just this is the first time we're doing it with a live broadcast in this way. If folks who are watching have questions, if you're on Periscope or YouTube, you can ask them in the chat. In LinkedIn, we might not be able to see you, although we're there too. And Kara, I'm Roy Bahat from Bloomberg Beta. We're a venture fund that focuses on investing in the future of work. Kara, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Kara Nortman. I'm one of the partners at Upfront Ventures. We're a venture firm based in Southern California that invests across many areas, including the future of work, enterprise software, consumer marketplaces, usually on the early stage side, seed or Series A. And Roy and I are longtime friends, and he is one of the people who keeps me honest and tells me when I'm being fake humble.
I don't know. All of us just trying to, if we can all keep each other honest, that's a good step in the right direction. Speaking of which, somebody who needs no false modesty because he has all the accomplishments he needs. If we can invite David up to join us too. David Ulevitch from Andreessen Horowitz. You want to just introduce yourself for a second before we jump in?
Sure. Thanks for having me here. I'm David Ulevitch. I was an entrepreneur for a long time. And then about 2 years ago, I joined Andreessen Horowitz. I focus on enterprise software investments. Primarily in the application space, so that includes all the future of work stuff we're going to be talking about, and I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. So I thought we just might start on the personal side, which is just to hear each of our experiences in working from home, just sort of what, in theory, we are people who ought to have been prepared for this, right? We're investors who know about tools, we use lots of different kinds of software, and still, in our little corner of the world, I feel like we've had a lot of personal surprises. I'm just curious to hear what those have been for you guys.
I'll start quickly. I think one of the surprises is that I think we give ourselves these labels. I'm an introvert, I'm an extrovert, I'm, really good at reaching out to people or whatever it is. And I actually just feel like every one of my labels is broken. And in a way that I've only really realized recently, how much we hold ourselves back and by putting those things in place. And so I think one of the things was just how mildly depressed I've been for so long without recognizing it, even though I think I'm talking to people and interacting with the world. And so more around that, but I think those labels, I think we're just learning about ourselves in different ways. And I find I'm much more introverted on big Zooms, for example. And so I feel and I've never been that way in a room. I was very comfortable talking in a room. And I'm guessing however we all act in the real world, thinking it translates to video there are probably things that we're not realizing about ourselves or our teams that are both better and worse.
Yeah. And you've had obviously some crazy life experiences. Can you just say one sentence about the new soccer team before we keep going all in on the future of work?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, if I told Roy, I'm I can talk about remote soccer because soccer, all you need is, a ball and you can play.
I should have had a prop.
Anyway, a little side project I'd been working on that became a real project was bringing a professional women's soccer team to Los Angeles. So you can find us at We Are Angel City on the interwebs. But basically, it was an effort that started coming out of some of the nonprofit work we did with All Raise and Time's Up. And I became friendly with this woman named Natalie Portman, who basically at some point said to me, hey, let's go find a team. And anyway, it started with nonprofit pay equity stuff. And this week we announced that we're bringing the 11th professional women's soccer team in the NWSL to Los Angeles. And if you go Google it, you'll find a lot of fun things about it, but it's a pretty cool origin story. It's the first female majority-owned, female president-led, female like all the female things, like I forget what they all are now because I haven't slept much, but it's the first professional sports team that's female-owned, female-led, female president. The best soccer players in the world, and they're just starting to get distribution on media. So hopefully, we say there's two kinds of NWSL fans. There's those that love the NWSL, and there's those that don't know it yet. So if you're in that second bucket, hopefully you'll hear a lot about it.
That's awesome. And you got the deal done under lockdown, which is kind of amazing too. David, what has some of the surprises been for you?
So in addition to occasional internet issues, which I may have periodically, look, for me, those people that know me the best know that I'm living my best life a little bit right now. And I mean that not just because I enjoy sort of working and being able to make time, like not have a commute and dig into things. But also I found that I'm connecting with people more regularly than I would normally. Like it's easier to just pick up the phone and call somebody. So I'm reaching out to people sort of in my old college alumni network, people I used to work with. And I've really enjoyed the experience of just sort of having much more regular touch points with people that I care about, but maybe aren't in my direct orbit of my day-to-day job. And then it turns out that you have more overlap than you expect. So I've really enjoyed the being able to sort of have more connectivity to people that weren't in sort of my Silicon Valley blinders pre work from home. So that's been a plus. And then I think that, the challenge for me has been really figuring out how to manage my time. I mean, I think for all professionals, time management is hard, but when you have the ability to say yes to one more meeting, or taking a meeting after dinner, or taking a meeting slightly earlier in the morning and maybe not getting exercise, or whatever the case, it's just so easy to say yes right now to just one more call or one more Zoom. That has been an even greater struggle than just normal day-to-day life.
Yeah, I had the same thing. I mean, for me, that was like, I didn't realize at first I was loving it too. And I think remote work is like the crack cocaine of work, because from the second you start working till when you're done, like there's no get up and go to the next room for a meeting. It's just on. And, I finally, after a month or so, kind of fell over, to be honest. And I'm now going to cut back how many hours per day I do. And I think for me, I've always been aware of being fortunate, but the surprise has been, especially with everything happening, I feel so much yes, I have my issues and struggling with this stuff, but I feel so much more aware of the difference in how fortunate I feel. And look, and we're talking 3 VCs, that not a particularly representative profession or group, but about a kind of work that is, really what the minority of Americans do, right? Only a third or so of Americans have this kind of full-time work from home thing. I think that's probably going to be, meaning even now. And I think that that's probably going to evolve over time, but I don't really know. Oh, I forgot to say, I just violated our first rule, which is whether or not we, make predictions. I'm going to try to avoid making predictions. And so let me ask instead about things happening right now, role models. I've been curious about which companies or people you look at and you're like, yeah, they have this new way of working totally figured out. We have not, I don't think, I could be mistaken, invested in a company that is like a company with tons of employees that's fully distributed from the beginning. I actually was kind of at first a real skeptic about remote work as the main way. And I'm just curious what role models you guys are seeing.
While Kara's thinking about a smart answer to that, I'll give you just that sort of ties what you were saying previously with what you just asked, which is that one observation that's been very consistent when I talk to people that are employees at companies, especially tech companies, one observation that's been consistent is that they have way less meetings, actually way less internal meetings, because you're not just all going to a conference room to have this stupid planning meeting or this stupid review meeting or whatever. And so there's been a lot more productivity for just the individual contributors. And that's been a huge welcome change. And when they're on sort of the weekly all hands, they can be engaged and listen and pay attention but like they don't feel like they're just constantly schlepping from meeting to meeting during the day. They're actually getting work done, and that to me is great, and I think a lot of them like it.
Yeah, David, you need to keep talking because I still have to keep Googling best company work from home.
Yeah, I mean, look, it used to be that like the biggest, here was my old argument. My old argument was, show me the biggest company that is purely distributed. And people in tech would be like, WordPress, Automatic. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. Like that's a great company. If you compare it to the very biggest companies in the world, it's still modest in size. And now we have InVision, which is a public company. You know, we have fast growers like GitLab. And I always thought there was an exception for folks doing open source, so like MySQL, but then they're kind of building their whole company around this thing that is distributed. Maybe that becomes more common, but I don't even know kind of quite where to look for inspiration. So, you know, Kara, if we're looking at Google, fine.
No, I mean, I'm kidding. I think, honestly, like, I think one of the bigger things I've thought a lot about is just where we are in the overall like chest pounding versus like canceling.
Oh man, how we work, like how we talk about ourselves, you mean?
Well, yeah, I mean, I just like, in a way, I think like this time overall has broken our brains, you know, and it's just like, you know, we like these analogies and easy sound bites and things to digest, and we need words of inspiration, but I think it's probably most interesting to answer this question with the companies I know the best versus the ones that I've like admired from the far. So it's the one I work in, you know, it's like the one I work in Upfront, and then it's some of the portfolio companies I work with. And I would say, the one interesting distinction, like I'm invested both in companies that have been remote first from the beginning and companies that were like dyed in the wool, religious about getting people in the same shared space. And I think the biggest thing is actually just more the starting point of like, what was your company culture like, and what did you and what were you good at, and what's now breaking? Because I've heard even from some of my remote work companies, they're having harder times in some cases than the companies. I shouldn't say my companies, the companies that I've invested in. Like I'm just a little minority investor in there, but the companies I've invested in who were all in office and had to reinvent everything, so they kind of threw everything out. Versus the ones that already had a remote culture. I think the thing we may be missing is like, I love hearing from my friends at GitLab who talk about their coffee meetings, and that's like bringing a coffee to your computer. But those people were also just people in the real world who had all these other things to do that aren't doing them anymore. And so how do you actually adjust to that? So I would say just like get more specific. Being much more intentional about how to line up people's time. One just quick tip, like this is something we did at Upfront. It didn't totally work well for me, but we tried to have everyone not work the same set of days around.
Take vacation together.
Yeah, I mean, like, what does that mean? And how do you force people? Like, we set norms because no one's taking vacation. What does even vacation mean right now? But
I'm going out for 2 weeks starting Saturday, so I'm going to try to break that. But yeah.
Nice. But like, you know, norms around leaving people alone and just, you know, stuff like that. But then all the way to, I've seen some really extensive documents that are working documents around like Google Docs or Notion or whatever your favorite productivity tool is, around how do you interview someone in a web environment, and like literally down to make sure you have phone numbers for when you have Wi-Fi issues. Mm-hmm. Sounds silly, but how many of us are like angry a couple times a day because we're late to something we tried to be on time to and our Wi-Fi doesn't work? So
totally.
Some people are like silly, but some of them I think like it's just like a constant. Basically every board meeting I'm on, I ask the founders to share with me anything that's working, and I think we just need to do more of that at like a micro.
Yeah. And David, you were talking about leadership earlier. I mean, what it was making me think is like so many, I mean, you were CEO. I feel like Kara, you were, I guess all three of us were. I feel like there's so much of being a leader of an organization that has been a physical practice. It's like walking around, like it's almost like there's like an animal aspect of being in the front of the room, and, you know, and all that stuff is now out the window. And I don't know, I was just curious what you meant by the different forms of.
Yeah, it's very hard to walk around, you know, the office and annoy people and, you know, test out your comedy routine on them when you don't actually have a floor to walk around with.
Right.
Track them.
No open mic.
So I do think, though, you know, some of the things that people are now putting a premium on that I've observed that work well is, you know, it's like we now basically have to respect asynchronous communication. That's sort of my observation. You talk about the constant interruptions. I'm sure Kara's like reloading her browser right now.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is not asynchronous, so she's just going to miss out on it.
Sure.
But like, so, people that know how to write really well and know how to communicate effectively, that's become really important. I think for leaders, another observation, I was talking to a CEO at a board meeting a few weeks ago, and the person made the observation, welcome back. The person made the observation that, they used to be able to fire off an email that just says, hey, where's that thing? Like,
Right.
no, like, hey, how are you? Or, hey, like, I know you got a whole full plate. Like, no sandwich around it. Just like, hey, where's that thing? And you can get away with that when you see the person at the office the next day and say like, oh, I was just firing that off because I didn't want to forget before I went to bed or whatever. Like, I know you have a full plate. But in a world where we're all working in different places and we're all dealing with, like, some people have kids that are running amok and, like, there's so much more cognitive load for people. I think people now are writing a little bit more articulately with a little bit more compassion, like, hey, I don't know if you had a chance to get to this today. It's really important we do this for this other reason. If you have an update for it, let me know. Like, they're just writing in a more compassionate way. So that's important. And then the asynchronous communication, I think, has been the other one, where you want to document things, you want to store it, whether it's in Notion or whatever else it is. People are using voice transcription services. And I'm seeing a lot more sort of capturing of information in a way that they should have actually been doing when they were in the office, but they weren't. But now they realize they have to do it, and so these work from home best practices are actually just best practices.
Yeah, no. One of the founders who we backed, this guy Dan Pupius from Range, that makes a team productivity tool. He's like, yeah, what happens when you work distributed is all the stuff you used to be able to paper over in the in-person environment, you now have to make explicit. And I think that's probably a good thing. The other thing I hear you saying is, you were just mentioning, like, managing kids. I feel like mostly in a good way, although I think it's been hard for lots of folks. And I'm curious, Kara, especially for you, how this has landed too, is like my daughter sometimes comes in the picture in, like, when I'm talking to somebody, and it's like, my kids are in the picture in more than just that way, in the sense that, like, everybody who I work with knows, like, when it's time for me to go get the bread out of the oven. And there's just this embrace of life. At the same time, I talked to a friend who was like, yeah, I've got a little kid and our company just expects us to work exactly the same, and I can't do that. And so I think it's just all these fault lines showing up.
Yeah, I mean, I think the kid stuff is just so real and so different depending upon the situation you're in, the age of your kids, the resources you have. And I truly think that is the hard and untold story. Everyone's talking about the silver linings. And even I have older kids now. My 7-year-old told me today she's 16 and would like to go on a jog by herself. And can we just accommodate that? And I was like, oh, you're 7, but she thinks she's 16 because she's watched so many things on television she shouldn't, or on Netflix. I actually I think that piece of it, the human piece of it, has been really nice, because it does break the ice in a totally different way when you have, someone like run in and do something wildly appropriate and you drop an expletive because you're like, wait a second, what did you just do? But I also think we've been talking a lot about the silver linings of being around your kids more often. And I also think there's the boundary stuff, where my kids told me recently that they feel like they actually see me less now than they did when I was traveling a ton, like recently, because I'm super addicted to being responsive in the moment. And so I just like all the other things. I think there are fun parts to that. And also dangerous parts. And then people with little kids and all the educational, like not being able to go back to school. I mean, these things are really hard. And we have to figure out how to support all the people we work with who are in harder or easier situations. And I don't know that anyone knows how to do that yet.
Yeah, I mean, we saw Max asked here on YouTube about, like, is there work to humanize relationships in a remote setting? And I think about that both in terms of, like, what are the leadership practices, but also, like, what's the software that you can use? Because some software makes you feel more human than other software. So I don't know what you guys are seeing on that in terms of what what can address that issue that we're talking about.
Have either of the two of you used Icebreaker Video yet?
No.
I don't want to say, like, you're just talking about a company that we may know firsthand.
Oh, are you I didn't know you were. Are you okay? Well, whatever. So Maybe you can't disclose. Anyway, so there are increasingly these tools. So like if you think about what makes for great high-performing teams, in addition to having really high-quality people, that just makes for high-quality individuals and high-performing individuals. But like the high-performing team requires that foundation of trust. And so I thought that question of like how do you humanize relationships is a really good one. And one of the things that we were playing around with recently was Icebreaker, where you go into this meeting, they kind of do this like speed dating style thing where you get to know your coworker in a much better way. They give you prompts, they're appropriate questions of, hey, what's the best vacation you ever took, or what's something really hard you did? What's the best thing you cooked recently in the pandemic? And you can customize all these things. And I thought that was just a really good way. Actually, we used it with some of our partners, and I actually got to know some of my partners better than I knew them before. And I thought, first of all, it's really it's disarming. And so it takes people sort of off edge. It was fun. We then like got back into like sort of the group room and were able to sort of make jokes and talk about some of the things we learned about each other. So I thought that was a great tool. There's a bunch of other tools I'm sure out there that are.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's this funny seesaw too between sometimes stuff with lots of structure, like that can seem to work. And like we did this team building exercise where we sent one person the Lego kit and the other person the instructions, and you had to explain to each other how to do it. It's like stuff like that's fun. And then you're also missing the really unstructured stuff. So like I just, Felix Matsatias on LinkedIn said, missing the whiteboarding sessions and brainstorming. Like I feel like there was this kind of like fade in, fade out, pay attention and don't, sort of more fluid nature of meetings that I don't know if we're going to be missing a beat by how do you recreate the unstructured stuff too?
Well, we've been joining our Monday morning partner meeting. Some people join 5-10 minutes early, and then they just like hang out like it's a water.
Oh, that's cool.
And so that's been pretty good as a way to just catch up on how was your weekend, the way you would as if you walked into the conference room.
I love that. I love that idea of like just having a practice of joining early. Looks like you're about to say something, Kara.
Well, no, I was just thinking, I mean, we've been doing some of that stuff too. We actually did Zoom trivia yesterday, and that was initially like, oh my gosh, I have to use my brain and memory, but it was, and we did a cash prize. And it's amazing how even if it's a dollar, if you're winning something, it gets your competitive spirit flowing. And it was so much fun. And then actually 2 of my daughters joined me, and some other people joined, and it was just really fun. It was just a very different dynamic, and it was like whoever could type into the fastest in Zoom. But the other thing I've been thinking a little bit about, I saw some stat the other day that was something like your most comfortable relationships you're talking to 40% more. And your like less comfortable relationships, you're actually talking to 40% less. And so like wondering if there's like, you should actually, there's some, I don't know if this exists. Maybe we can all fund it after the show.
Requests for startups are allowed here, Any founders pitch us,
I think you do get into these like behaviors and the lower friction relationships you talk to more. And so maybe there's something like you have to put a certain amount of time on your calendar every day, and your phone auto dials the person that you need to call that you've been procrastinating in your company or your firm. And so I don't know, something like that. But I think there is a risk that you kind of, I don't know, there's a risk that you end up not investing as you should in certain relationships.
Yeah, I noticed that just this morning. It's like the people who you run into the hallway with in the office, you don't really have a work reason to reach out to them, but you really did get something both personal and professional out of running into them. Like the physical, we'll zoom out and talk about the office in a second. Like, let's just stay on how work gets done for a minute. But I don't know. I really do feel like there's something that is, that I'm hungry to replace. And I see Annie jumping in and asking about, another kind of work to replace, which is the trust building meeting with a client. Like, we have these trust building meetings with founders. They're trying to build trust with us and we're trying to build trust with them. Anything you guys are seeing that's working either in terms of practices or tools for how do you build trust through this teeny little window?
I have to figure out how to break something really fast and
right?
then solve it. I mean, honestly, like as soon as something goes terribly wrong, which it seems to a lot, it just who shows up and does the work. So I don't know, like obviously if it's a new customer, that's harder, but maybe there are just some like really weird things you can play with and give people access to products or just, I don't know. I mean, David, you've operated something much more recently than I have other than a soccer team. So would love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think this is where salespeople actually have some of these best practices.
Oh, interesting.
They,
Totally.
they find a connection. Like the best salespeople are great listeners, and they find a connection with the person they're talking to almost immediately. And they build, unrelated to whatever the thing they're selling is or what their topic is, they find that point of connection. Oh, maybe we both love backpacking. Oh, maybe we're both dealing with what are our kids going to do in a few months or now. I guess I don't have kids, so I guess I don't know the timeline. But like, they find that point of connection and they build that relation, and oftentimes they know people in common. LinkedIn is good for sort of figuring out sometimes who you might know in common. It's also terrible for that at times because a lot of people just accept invites. But I think that you end up talking the first few minutes of a brand new meeting with someone about not the subject matter of the meeting, but just trying to get a little bit of information of who they are and what's important to them. And I think that's a sales technique that everyone who's not in sales should sort of embrace and just make you a more interesting person.
It's bringing out.
Maybe we could have for non-sales people or for people that doesn't come easily to them, you could have a small talk generator, like a small talk, and it's like, okay, does that not work for you? Let's move on.
Let's talk about GPT-3. So let's talk about automation and generative predictions from technology. I've got a theory, and I want to test the theory out on you, see if it's controversial or if you both agree. I never know what's contrarian anymore. Which is this is the era where the individual office worker now has greater freedom than ever to experiment with new software because they're not behind the firewall necessarily. They're sitting in a more common environment with other people, and that and I'm talking about like knowledge work professionals here. So there's a small segment of all work, but that the folks who embrace automation and bring in tools that, level them up. We have a portfolio company that experimented with GPT-3 for Replit so that you can literally converse with your code and figure out what it is doing. Is like, in addition to being able to write better, David, which you flagged as a thing that will be of greater value now, do you guys think being able to pick and use your own tools and automation tools, is that a valuable thing now or no? Because I guess I'd say I think people are going to have a chance to step forward in their careers by picking the right tools and deploying them. But maybe that's just in the VC bubble think.
I have a thought, but I think there's historically in IT, there's always been a pendulum of where the control is for picking tools. And right now it's firmly in the hands of the individuals picking the tools they use. Maybe that'll stay that way for a long time. Buying power has been pushed way down to employees. They can often pull out their credit card and expense something. And we see great bottoms-up tools taking advantage of that. So individual designers will use something like Figma. A developer might choose to use Replit instead of using some other code editor because they like the capabilities with it. On the other hand, that has sort of happened every decade or so, and then it switches back to the CIO and the CISO and the CFO, sort of tightening the reins on spending, tightening the reins on tools, enforcing security. So, I would like to think that the tool optionality and the ability to expense things will stick around for a while. But those things tend to be very cyclical.
You're talking about the ability to buy. I guess I'm also asking about, do you think that will make a person better? Like if somebody is the CIO of their own life and they think part of their job now is to go out and find tools and bring them in, is that an important skill or not really?
Look, I'm an enthusiast, so I think that persona is a critically important skill. I've always liked to play with tools, but you got to be productive. And I think, we haven't touched on this yet, but like when we talk about how to promote people or how to do performance evaluations, I'm not sure it's going to be based on like the inputs of what tools people use, but it's going to be based on the outputs and the results people have. Yeah.
But so actually, we have a question about that. Scott Shane from Comeback Capital is asking on LinkedIn about how without the hallway chatter, you'll get a sense of like cross hierarchy rank and big organizations. Like a lot of those signals have come to matter. I don't know, career path and Kim also asked about it. Kara, any thoughts on how career progression is going to work now that we're going to do a performance review cycle under lockdown?
Yeah, for sure. But I have to say something about GPT. Otherwise, I might be fired from being a venture capitalist.
Fired.
Job after this. And I it's funny. I don't think the problem is more tools and more automation. Like I know we're all about RPA and automation and we're going to get more and more tools and it's super cool. I actually think it is all the questions around how you get alignment and you make people feel felt, connected to the other people they need to work with and delivering products and services that the end user wants. And so in a lot of ways, I think it's like the collaboration element. and the more we're all empowered to feel powerful in how you create, I think that's powerful psychologically. But I don't know. I still think it's just going to be just as hard as ever to figure out how to build things that people want to use and are delighted using, and make, all that sort of stuff. So
if anything, people might become more selective because they get used to using better stuff that actually works.
Totally. The thing I've been talking about, I'm going to say it here. I'm going to sound like a beast.
I've
been thinking about low code HR. Like, how do you actually get all the engineering leaders and, kind of leaders that are not HR to truly pull things in that make them better managers versus it being a better tool that HR is giving them. And then the other thing I've been thinking about is, in this same vein, is just, I don't know. I just think wherever you are in the stack of, do I make code or do I make people better? The more we can sort of bring those two brains together. Better. And I don't think that it's one or the other, and it's really more about bringing those two things together.
Yeah, so, it's funny. We once did, as a team, holacracy training to learn what it was all about, this system. And holacracy is perceived to be this no hierarchy, it's all free, it sounds woo-woo. It's actually
is that like a Shea thing? Is that what it is?
You got to go through a whole ritual. Okay. It is the most structured managerial system I've ever seen. There are 3 kinds of meetings. You do things in a certain way. And I think this low code HR, there's a company that we invested in called Donut that allows you to sort of automate processes for HR, but figuring out what's structured and what's not. I think that feels to me like a real question. Jack Cates asked on YouTube, said he's starting his first job, and how do you make remote onboarding work better? I think the answer is, companies were never that great at it, with some exceptions. I think companies like Facebook have been really great at it, but with exceptions there. And now it's on you to figure out, okay, well, what's the structure you'll create for yourself? How do you make a list of people to meet and reach out to them? How do you find the repositories of documentation? And before you get busy, go really deep in reading all the stuff that's important but not urgent. And so I think maybe, David, that's another way that the balance of power shifts is, I used to expect the company would get me up to speed. Now it's okay, I switched jobs, but I got the same keyboard and the same monitor. I got to learn how to be productive in this new thing.
Yeah, it's kind of like going to your first day of freshman year of college. There's nobody's going to give you the map of how to make it successful. I think people have to be a lot more sort of self-supporting or taking a lot more initiative than they may have had to in the past. And for some people, that's just their natural motion. And for others, they'll have to figure it out. You didn't mention, I don't know if you want to go to a specific question. You mentioned something about performance reviews and career stuff.
Yeah, no, do it. Let's talk about it. Somebody did, for sure.
I am hopeful that one of the great things that we're starting to see now that will continue is that, I think promotions historically have always been based on maybe how you network or how you present yourself or how you advocate for yourself. And now it'll be much more focused. And I know we're not making predictions. This is something that I think
this is a hope.
This is the hope, is that it'll be, that people's performance will be measured on the outputs and the results.
Do you think it'll be more fair?
Yeah, more fair, not based on how you interact. If you don't interact,
all that stuff,
right?
Yeah.
That's cool. I still think we're all really unfair people, but I agree. I think I agree. I think there's going to be more about, just in general, just output versus input. And one of the things you can't, and in a lot of ways, I think, in our very small sliver of the world, there's certain businesses that have ceased to exist because the world has changed so much. And I'm just talking tech and software right now, not the other parts of the world. But in a lot of ways, I think this is just this time is magnifying the things that were working well for us and the things that are broken. And so if you go to onboarding or promotions or any of it, it's just more documentation, giving more, scheduling things more precisely, being more thoughtful about when am I doing something to build rapport, and that's okay, versus when am I transactional and what do I need to move between the two. And I just think we all need to we're all becoming more overt at thinking about those components. And hopefully when we go back to this hybrid environment, they'll, some of that will stick around.
Yeah. I think that that point about bringing out more of some of the stuff that was already there, I've been thinking about it in the context of optimization, where, in some functions in some companies, you just have this endless quest to squeeze every ounce of productivity out of a person and measure every last thing. And now that you can literally track all of this stuff, which has been true for some people in some functions for a long time, do we get to peak kind of Taylorism, peak scientific management. And I think that could be a really bad thing in lots of ways. I mean, I'll give you one funny example. There's a company that's in the current YC batch called Sidekick that does this little screen, and a few of us have one, that lets you have an always on video connection to people on your team. And I saw in my like high school CS email list, which exists and is such a thing, people saying like, oh, are people going to watch me? And I kind of feel the opposite, which is it's giving me an ambient sense of who's there without needing to be like, excuse me, are you available for a quick consultation? And so I don't know, I guess I'm just feeling all this weird paradox of like more observed and more natural at the same time.
I think that's right. I mean, I use Tandem all the time, which is a company that we invested in. And it's the same thing. I like people to be able to.
In what way do you use it? Can you just say for folks who aren't familiar with it?
Tandem is
like for you to do an ad.
Sure. It's like an ad hoc collaboration tool. So if somebody wants to know that I'm available and they want to just jump into a water cooler with me, they can. If someone sees that I'm talking to Roy and they're like, oh, I wonder what they're talking about, they can jump into our room. You don't have to send a calendar invite, set up a meeting. So I think all these kinds of tools that enable that ad hoc conversation that pairs nicely with the asynchronous communication, these things are quite compelling to me. And they fit with my workflow, right? Yeah. They fit with the way I work. I like when people don't have to have the pretense of scheduling a meeting for a quick conversation. I mean, it just burns time.
I know. It's like somebody once said this thing to me of like, I'm available at 2 times, 6 months from now or right now or 6 months from now. And I've just started responding to people like, yeah, text me right now. Let's do it. And
Roy, you said that to me when I wanted to have a meeting with you and I was flying up to San Francisco, and you're like, that's like a week from now. Like, just tell me.
That's my work zone. Sorry.
And you know what? I thought you actually just didn't want to see me, but so it's good.
I love seeing you. Look at this. I'm intentionally trying to see you here.
I'm kidding.
All right. So I want to zoom out in a second to talking about like when we're going to the office, some of the big picture, like macro trends. But I think we've got Andreas Klinger here with us, who we can bring up to join us for a second. What's special about Andreas, and the reason we want to have him here, is that, assuming we can get him up, is that his entire fund, which is Remote First Capital, is focused on technologies that enable remote work or companies that are primarily or exclusively engaged in working remotely. And maybe we can get him on. There we go. Hey, Andres, how are you?
Hey, thanks for having me.
So I feel like we're like tourists in your terrain that you have been deeply committed to for a long time. I just love to know, like, what do you think we should be talking about that we missed so far?
I mean, the whole discussion is super interesting. One thing that's always like my main motivation and the main thing I look for in investments is second degree and third degree effects of remote work or like global work. Like we talk a lot about working from home, but like remote work, there's this huge aspect of actually international work and international lives in a way. Like we used to move to different cities in our life, and now we work for different companies in different cities and so on and so on. What, in your opinion, is like second and third degree effects in our lives because of this trend?
What's that?
Well, given Andreas,
yeah, right. Can we start with you? Why don't you? Yeah, exactly. Why don't you tell us what you think first? Good point.
Is this one of those things where you're asking a question, but it's actually something you just want to say?
No. We have some thoughts, but feel free to tell us.
Okay. So I like, for me, interesting is like a few aspects. Like we think and talk a lot about the work aspect. So being able to live in Latin America or like anywhere, but work for a company that's a career-defining role in San Francisco, you know, like I work for Product Hunt, and that pretty much makes my career in a way, right? And that's now an opportunity that's true for a lot of people. One aspect that's, in my opinion, a little bit overlooked is education. And I think that's the one I'm personally super bullish, and I'm also like super overwhelmed with what exciting stuff is out there. And I will plug a few, and that's not investments of mine, actually. So like there is, for example, the Knowledge Society, tks.world, completely mind-blowing stuff, like 15-year-old kids doing gene editing, completely amazing. There is stuff like Quantic Edo, which is like online MBA programs and so on. So like there's so much stuff happening right now. And if you think about career-defining moments, it's kind of like your work, but also like your education. And I wonder, like, will it be normal for people in San Francisco to send their kids to learn online versus to go into like a local?
If my kids are any indication, I think the answer is going to be a huge no. Like my daughter now knows how to say, I hate Zoom. But I think we were bundling a learning aspect of education with a child care aspect of education, and not just child care from the parents' perspective, but from the kids' perspective. It's like, making friends, socializing. It's like, I feel bad for the folks who are starting high school and it's going to go online. But I think, one of the things, Andreas, that you brings up for me is I think it's very likely to exacerbate inequality, because folks who have access to tools can focus on using them and learning much more rapidly. And then a lot of folks, it's just like, no, let's not even call it. They're just not really even learning at all. And so that's my fear, is that that what you're describing is possible, but will not be uniform enough to be lifting everybody up. I don't know. That's the fear. That's
fair with every technology. Correct?
Yeah, not evenly distributed.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we're going to be in this for a long time. I mean, I'm curious, Andreas, what you're seeing from companies, but I think about second order effects on things like real estate, because I used to work in city government. And, my expectation keeps getting longer for how long this lockdown is going to take. So that's not a prediction, but we actually did a survey run with Servata, and we asked like a statistical sample of American office workers what they expected. And 2/3 of them said they would not come back to the office until there was a vaccine, and then 80% of them expected to be back within a year. And I think these two things do not align with one another. Anyway, so I think we're just in this for a long time. And then just one last stat, and then Kara, I think you were going to say something, is when we go back, 72% of people said they wanted at most to go back to the office 2 days a week. So like the idea of the office as a temporary stop feels like, for the way cities are shaped and transportation works, it is going to have these unpredictable consequences. Kara, I feel like I ran over you.
No, you gave me enough time to completely change my mind, so that was good. One thing directly down the middle is, I would say everyone's now an expert on online education, which is interesting. It's made me realize how much less I know about it, even though I've spent 6 years thinking about it. I said to someone the other day, who's like a 30-year veteran, runs a firm I looked up to when I was like a little kid as an associate in Boston. And I said, well, I've been looking at workforce training and online education for 6 years since I got back into venture, but I've made one investment. So either it's not a specialty of mine, or I'm like, doing something wrong. And he said, well, in 30 years, I've made 3 investments. And I think that, so he said, if you're doing something wrong, I'm doing something wrong. So at least made me feel better. But I think it's interesting. I think the obvious thing there is that everything's going to move online. But then I think we're seeing like all the backlash around our kids and us and all of those sorts of things. So I heard something from one of the companies I work with, the only investment I made in this space, which is this company called Strive, where they're always talking about how your work is the classroom, and like, how do you bring those two things together? And so what
does that mean? Say a bit more about what you mean by that.
Meaning, like, let's say we had an analysis of this call after this session, after we were done, and they were like, listen, Kara talked too much.
Right, Roy interrupted.
What's your speaking score, or your one-on-one meeting? Stuff like that. Like, how do you actually take the stuff we're doing anyway and get us feedback, as opposed to, I'm going to go do math homework? How do we actually make it more practical, more personalized, all that sort of stuff? So I think there's a way to do that around everything from management training and what does it actually mean, and how do you make that work by actually allowing people to make mistakes in meetings and in a kind way pulling it out and making them better, versus like going to school for these things constantly. It's practical.
Spell check for meetings, sort of, for your meeting behavior.
Yeah, and then
underlined because you're being a jerk. I'm being a jerk right now. Whatever.
It's not all or nothing too, right?
Yeah.
Like, you need to figure out how to get back into the real world for education. And so, like, I think it's going to be great that a lot of money is going to come into hybrid models of education, and most of them shouldn't be venture funded. So I think the thing that might not be great is that a lot of people are going to feel the pain and the pressure of this asset class, who are doing important work and really figuring out when something, like, there's 3 biggest parts of the GDP, I think, are cybersecurity, which David and I like to spend time on, maybe you too, Roy and Andreas, education and healthcare, right? And so I don't know, the more like we can figure out how to collaborate around how things in education and workforce training, future work move between these things, and you don't just assume it's one thing, I think is going to be an important one. The only other thing I wanted to say is like, I think we're all going to wear shorts and trail running shoes for a while. So that is
a good thing. Yeah, we're not doing the wardrobe choices, but let me just say, it's been a while since I even thought about a tie. David, other stuff that you got on your mind as second order consequences before we thank Andreas?
Yeah, the first thing I was going to say was, what Kara just described. I actually, that's what I think of when I think of augmented reality. So a lot of people think of augmented reality as like the glasses that you put on, but actually like something that gives you feedback after a meeting automatically by analyzing or transcribing things.
Yeah.
Something that's looking at your screen or looks at your calendar and tells you where you're spending your time. To me, that's actually really augmented reality.
Totally. We had somebody from Otter in the comments.
Totally. Yeah. So like I love that kind of augmented reality, and I think that's the kind I get excited about. The second and third order effects. So look, some people know I'm in Montana right now. I actually know the CTO of a major company who lists on LinkedIn that he's in San Francisco, but he hasn't lived in San Francisco in I think like a decade. And so he does that just for like the recruiter side of things. But he actually worked remote for a long time. And so when I think of those second and third order effects here in Montana, I just got a graph actually this morning of the real estate market where I am. And it's up 3x year over year.
Wow.
And so that just tells you all these people have realized if you can get good internet, and this is proving that my internet's good enough, I guess, and you can be where you want to be and still do your job, which again, not everyone can, but for people that are in the high tech space, they actually largely can. And we've now seen the shift that all these jobs that couldn't be done remote can clearly now be.
Yeah, I mean, I think like real estate listings, including how fast the bandwidth is going to be, and I also think that there's something related. Sorry, say that again.
Yeah, home offices.
Yeah, home offices. I mean, look, my partner James in the fund said everybody's going to have a video studio at home. To which my wife Sarah immediately said, "Not in our house," or something like that. But I also think there's something around organizational structure that could change with that. It's like, I'm sitting at the same desk. I may only go into the office eventually a day or two a week. David Doswell on YouTube was saying Delaware C Corp in the cloud. And I was sort of thinking like the nature of needing to think of yourself in one fixed job, that continued fragmentation, it just might evolve. It just might evolve. All right, Andreas, I'm going to thank you. And we're going to move on to a couple other subjects. Appreciate you joining us.
No worries. Have a great day.
All right, we have about a little more than 10 minutes left here. David, Kara, I got a couple more things, but what else is burning on your minds?
David, is anything burning on your mind?
I mean, that's related to this topic. Let me narrow in. Lots of things are on my mind. It's one of, I think, we have to remember that this is not exactly remote work, what's happening right now.
Say more.
You mentioned this, you touched on this for a minute, Roy, but like for a lot of people that worked at these companies like Envision or Automatic, they had oriented their life and sort of lifestyle and built the like structure around them to enable them to be really productive at home. And so like for a lot of people, they just got thrown into this, and now they've figured out something that works, but they didn't plan for it. And so I think it's important for us to remember that like whatever this looks like at the end of it, it's going to be different than it is now. Because now is like this, we got thrust into this. Some people didn't want it. Some people didn't plan their home office for it. They didn't plan their video room for it. Like, if you follow the Room Rater account on Twitter, which is like one of my favorite Twitter accounts, where they rate people who are on national TV based on their background of their home on camera, right? So like, they might say, oh, Kara, it's great you have books. You must be really smart. So you get a 10 out of 10. But they'll say, David, it looks like you have corrugated metal behind you. You get 0 out of 10 or whatever. Like people need to recognize that this is not exactly what remote work is, and so they shouldn't come up with their own perspective of what they think their future work will look like, because it may not be exactly this. They may like remote work. It could be this.
Yeah.
I like that. I like that, and like building on that. I think we're probably going to come out of this time thinking people are omni-channel by design. We're not meant to sit alone in a room on a computer just all the time, and we're not probably meant to be forced to be on airplanes and go into workspaces for a specific set of hours all the time. And I think I think the really hard thing is going to be how to take away as much of the good from this time in a way that works for many different people's preferences. And like, because I don't know how that happens. I think about just like a simple example. You know, if you meet one of the beautiful things about Silicon Valley is that with the close proximity of, you know, all the different startups and venture capitalists and hiring people, and it's one of the reasons it's special. And I'm a venture capitalist who invests all over the country and world, but I live in LA. And sometimes I'll get an interesting company and I'll say, well, but I don't go to that city, and I have 3 kids and I sit on boards, and you know, so you you think about those things because there's only so many.
We've been focused on the Bay Area and the Acela corridor since we started, on the theory that that's where we could serve startups most effectively. I think, you know, we used to like take these tours to other places with VCs and members of Congress to like learn about investing in places like Tulsa. And now I'm like, hey, maybe our stance is absurd. I mean, that's the question we're asking ourselves.
But the thing I was going to say is, so it's so much more effective in a lot of ways, I think, to have Zoom board meetings. And in a lot of ways, that really should open up access to capital to people in more parts of the world. And there will be analogs for people.
Is there a but in there coming?
Well, no, I was going to say there are going to be analogs to people who are building companies and can really hire in different places. The but is, I really, really believe that real world human interaction is important. I saw my first friend for the first, like in months the other day, and I just felt.
Yeah, it's like visceral.
So I think though a lot of this is going to be, how do we set up norms that everyone can live by? Because if you have, for example, a board meeting where some people are in person versus not, it won't be as
hard. Yeah, one thing I'm still a real skeptic on is the hybrid workplace. Like, I think that it's very difficult to manage concurrent in-person and remote processes. And, you know, big companies do it, but maybe that's why big companies slow down. And that maybe what we need to do is, like, you know, even when you're together in the office, you're working remotely, you just happen to be there. I'll test out one other theory on you. And David, since you sold your company to a big corporation, you may have a view on this, which is, it used to be that bigger organizations were more stable and predictable. And, you know, Ask Wonder did this study of reopening plans of the biggest companies in America. And they looked at 37 of the biggest companies, could not find one outside of real estate brokerage with a plan to go back to the office for everybody. And so you have this large organization. I actually think that maybe there's a cloud of uncertainty over those large organizations because they can't quite figure out how to adapt as quickly. So are like big organizations now less predictable and stable than little startups that could just be like, yeah, we'll work remotely, whatever, done?
I think that people underestimate the sheer momentum and gravitational sort of force that big companies have. Like, let's take Cisco, where I worked. You know, they have $50-something billion a year in revenue. Even if everything craters, it'll take 2 decades for that to really fall off a cliff. Now, they may not have big aggressive hiring plans or things like that, but you know, these companies, I actually think they're quite stable. They do, you know, people read about layoffs and things at these companies, and oftentimes half the people in these layoffs end up landing somewhere else in the company before the layoff actually takes place. So it's a little bit more of like an economic maneuver than sometimes a workforce change or numbers change in the aggregate. In fact, I think Cisco's had more employees after every layoff for the last, you know, layoffs. So it's really more of a rebalancing.
Yeah.
You know, I think that we've done a bunch of these CHRO breakfasts virtually since COVID, and we've brought in HR leaders and chief human resources officers from a bunch of different companies, really, really big ones, you know, the Fortune 500 style companies all the way down to mid-market companies. And I think they all have put a priority and a premium on being very agile in this moment. So I'm a little bit less cynical of the big companies' ability to adapt in terms of responding to their workforce. I think if they're a high-tech company, at least, they know that they have to be responsive. They all want to be seen as progressive and cool to work at, and so they tend to be pretty nimble. So I would say I don't worry about that as
Got
much.
it. You don't worry about
I've drank too much of the Kool-Aid. I have too much big company Kool-Aid in me, I guess.
By the way, I think I'm not talking about their existence. I think that is definitely very
just the cachet.
Really, from the perspective of an individual employee, predicting your experience may be harder in a big organization where it's like they got to come up with some global
change. Yeah, sure. So that's true. And look, we also live in a world now and this has been true since pre-COVID, where people just have less loyalty to their employer, and they feel we've been in a great bull market for a decade, and they just feel like they can just change their jobs when they want. And
interestingly, by the way, just to interrupt you, the data I think only support that for white men.
Oh, is that true? That could be true.
I missed that. I was dozing.
And it used to be that white men had greater loyalty to their employers, and now their job tenures are shorter. I think part of that is because lots of other communities were just excluded from the labor market. And so we have this view that like job tenures are getting shorter. Not clear to me if that's the case, you know, for lots of other groups. Although, again, it may be, it's just not clear to me. Yeah. But I mean, I definitely hear this, like, here, I'll ask a version of this question. More side hustles now or fewer side hustles for people?
Way more.
Yeah.
Way more.
Say more.
I mean, there's just way more tools available to let people be.
I mean, I guess Kara's got a soccer team as a side hustle, so there's that.
And Julie Ehrman, shout out to Julie, who's listening in, president of the team.
No, way easier. And also more focused time to do it. I mean, like I started recording with somebody on my team a daily, like, here's what we're learning about work called This Is Not Advice, that we, you know, do a daily video on Twitter. So, I mean, I'm feeling that. David, did I interrupt you or Kara?
They're just way better tools.
Yeah.
No, I also just think like this, again, back to labels, like this idea that we have work and hobbies and this. Like, why should mountain biking or running for 10 hours a week be any more of a hobby than starting a soccer team or being a, you know, coding for another company?
Right.
I think we need to all find, like, I don't watch a lot of content, so sometimes I don't know what people are talking about when they're talking about like Tiger or whatever. But I talk to Julie Ehrman at midnight, you know, every night, because that gives me energy. So I think it's more like what gives you energy. And sometimes even doing the exact same thing for two different companies, even if one of them you're like not being paid by or you're being paid on the side, it can give you more energy for the other company. I think it's just like being transparent with yourself and making sure you're giving your all at the things that you're supposed to. And hopefully that starts with family and then your job. And then like, what's everything else after that? And some of those things you get paid for and some of them you don't.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So while we have a few more minutes, the things that you feel are missing from the work from home ecosystem. I wish such a thing existed. Something that's come up now twice in the comments. Jack Kennedy just said something. Hi, Jack. Is whiteboarding, like some physical thing to write on where you can kind of work together with others. I definitely feel that. We've heard that from big companies too. What are you guys missing?
By the way, like my first grader has a great whiteboarding tool. So it may just be that we need to like collaborate with some kindergartners and first graders. She uses something, I'm not an investor, but she uses something called Seesaw. And when she comes to my computer, she's like trying to draw on my Mac all the time. And so my guess is there's stuff out there and we should just hang out with our kids and see what they're doing. Cause they're like, and you know, anyway.
I'll take any excuse for that.
Seesaw, try it, Jack. Anyway.
David, anything you feel like you're missing?
Yeah, I'm thinking about my answer. Why don't you go first, Roy?
My only other one that I can think of is that we have now one version of the meeting, really, which is this version on Zoom, which is like everybody is like in either the speaker or one of equals, and it works for certain sizes and not others. And I just want more variety. Like, I just feel like there were all kinds of informal kinds of collaboration before that I don't even have names for. So I guess, Kara, to your point, naming some of these things, in some places we need to merge categories. Like, you know, is your soccer team your personal hobby or is it your work? It's both in lots of ways, I'm sure. You know, it's, it's just that in other ways, I think we need more words. Like there are 9 different kinds of meetings maybe, and we don't have names for all of them.
So I guess I came up with 2, and these are very tactical and specific. One is I would like a better calendar analytics tool of how I'm spending my time with recommendations on how I should spend my time. And just sort of, this goes back to like the holy grail of everybody wants a personal CRM. Yeah, like the personal CRM kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So that's a persistent one that I've always wanted, but you feel it more acutely now. The other one is that, and this is again, you felt this before COVID, but I feel like now I'm all in on SaaS tools. I don't really have like storing things. My files are like no longer in my like Box or Dropbox folder. They're just like all over the place across 50 different SaaS tools. And so this is not like a request for, like, it's not like an RFP, but enterprise search for me is terrible. Like I can never find the most recent version or thing, or like where did the comment happen? Was the comment on a Figma file? Was the comment in a Slack?
Yeah.
Like
Totally.
the context
Where
is
did that mobile notification go?
Yeah, where did that notification go? And like, where's the context? Where's the discussion? Where are we memorializing the decision? All these
Kara,
things.
before we wrap, anything you're craving?
I just want my iMessage contacts to work.
I'm an Android, so
I want Marcus on around.
don't work that well on Android either, though.
I actually, I mean, I think like auto-populating cross-platform type things, like just, hey, this person's on my phone and they're an Android user, and I'd like to be able to just start using that on the web. Honestly, I think, and I've seen a couple companies doing this, but just like a better CRM or inbox for work messaging. I mean, I feel like I can't keep up with my text messages in a way that I feel like broken, but so much communication is happening through text now. And so that's great, but also, probably.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. Some of these, like we started our firm 8 years ago and we were future of work day one. And some of these are the same unsolved problems, just now more so. And I guess I'm feeling, we talked about some of the business opportunities. I'm also feeling like paying attention to how our own behaviors and feelings about how we do this work. Like I used to feel pretty set and like, oh, I know how things function. And now I feel unset. And like, that actually feels good because it was boring before. Not boring, but.
I think one last quick thing, just when you've upset someone, if they could on Zoom, they could just send you, like there's some easy way to let them know without making them feel like, I just think
subtle way of doing it. That's a great one. Just these little details that like you had ways of signaling it before. Yeah.
And then
more humanity at work.
My big one is just like more room for people to make mistakes and learn from them, and like really the space to do it. I just feel like we're all yelling at each other in social media right now, and either really safely or we're not saying anything, and we just need more in the middle.
Yeah, more in the middle sounds good. Well, I've really liked talking in this conversation because I feel like we had like some good in the middle, and I always learn from you guys. So thank you. And here's to another time. We'll say bye to everybody. Thank you, everybody who joined in all the places.